Well, top of the morning, everybody. Good to see you today. And I got to tell you, I woke up this morning early, because I'm always paranoid when it's daylight saving. So I got up all the earlier, and the first thing in my mind was, what was I thinking doing Leviticus? This is the stupidest idea ever. Leviticus, now if you're a guest with us this morning, or maybe you're new to church, there are 66 books in the Bible. Of the 66 books, the craziest acid trip of them all, Leviticus. Welcome. All right, but we're doing Leviticus in tandem with the season of Lent, right, which is really great. And we've encouraged people during this time to set something or some place or someone or whatever to the side as holy and giving it some special treatment in a special way. And I can tell you, even after a few days, I feel like really good, because one of the things I set aside was the internet. So I'm only using it for direct work-related stuff or education-related stuff pertaining to school for me. And other than that, nothing. And so what that means, and I haven't really watched TV or anything, I have been completely blacked out for days. I don't know what Trump has done or said, or Kim Jong-un, or Congress, or Hollywood, or anything. Wow, that takes some of the stress out of life, man. I'm just enjoying myself, just drinking like protein shakes and calling life good. So it's been real pleasant. So I hope you're doing this whole season of Lent thing as well in the spirit of Leviticus, because again, it's just going to be something that I believe enriches our souls, and so that's what it's all about. And I got to tell you also, just real fast, I'm excited about this series. You know, I think there's going to be some parts, just being real candid, that we're going to have to work through mechanical things, because we want to really understand this kind of tricky piece of literature in the Bible. But I also believe that it will be something, if we receive it, is going to mobilize us and move us and shape us for some really great things, because the theme of Leviticus is a powerful theme. So, with that said, I'm going to pray, and then we're going to get underway. Jesus, I thank you so much for these people being here today to hear your word and to look at the tough parts of your Bible, right? Like, we don't want to just run to the easy things that are familiar and clean and simple, but also we want to see that, you know, there's sometimes really profound things that you say in the tough stuff. And so I pray that today is a day where we receive the tough stuff, that we try to get your big idea for this little nugget of literature in your Bible. And from that, man, that our lives would be blessed. And so, Jesus, we do love you, and we thank you so much in your good and awesome name. Amen. So Leviticus, this is the book where I joke, this is where all Bible reading plans go to die, right? Like, you start January 1, you get through Genesis, you get through Exodus, you get to Leviticus, and you're like, wow, this is like a word jumble of craziness and all the themes. I don't know what to do with this, because it seems like when you read it, you could walk away and say, so basically all it's about is like bodily fluids and sexual repression and how to dismember a canary, and you can't eat shellfish, and polycotton blends are bad, and you could just walk away from it and say, there's so much weirdness that there is nothing that I can apply to my life, right? So that can be kind of the temptation in this piece of literature. And yet I'm going to press back on that this morning and say, actually, at the core of this particular book, there are some important features. So, for example, one thing, what this book is really all about is about the presence of God. It's about the presence of God among God's people. And in that, it's about how we really have access to the presence of God, how we interact with the presence of God, what God needs to do in our lives so that we can enjoy Him more, have our lives built by Him more and on Him more and through Him more, all of that. And it comes through the context of a word called holiness. We're going to get to that word in a little while, but for now, I just want us to understand that more than all the little details of kind of wackiness that we see, there are some central themes that matter to every single one of us. Now, what I will concede in this is that if we were, kind of just looking at this without doing some homework, it would seem like there's a lot of strange things inside this. But I would also venture to say that if we took people from 3,500 years ago who first received the book of Leviticus, they would probably look at our world. If we brought them into the 21st century, they would look at our world and say, you all do some weird stuff. You got some weird habits and things like that. I mean, you just start to flip through channels on television if you have cable. I know some of you are like, cable? We cut that like 5 years ago. But there's some weird shows. Like one of the weird shows that my family's gotten into, I'm like, we do this for entertainment? This is so strange. Like I think other people would think we're nuts. Anybody gotten sucked into Dr. Pimple Popper yet? Yeah. Oh, dude, it's hard. Don't eat dinner while you watch it. Right? So, like, honestly, but it's like this thing where you're kind of grossed out by it, but then you kind of want to watch where it's going, And so it's weird. It's like a weird thing. And I think 3,500 years ago, people would be like, you all do that for entertainment? You're strange, man. That's some weird stuff. Here's another weird thing we do that I think they would think is weird. We take poison, literally poison, and we inject it into our faces to get rid of wrinkles. And then we poof up our lips with collagen, and then we use actual silicone implants to change our physical appearance. They would look at that and say, that's weird. What are you people doing? They'd be like, what do you do with your free time? And I go, oh, for our free time, we got that one mastered, man. We take a pig and we kill it. Then we take its skin and we stuff it, and we pay a bunch of money to people who throw that pig skin around, and we wear crazy wigs and paint our faces and scream like mad people with beer in our hands. And they'd be like, yeah, you're weird. And then we'd be like, more than that, our men, they wax now. Like, really? On purpose? Yeah, they wax. And then on top of that, it'd be like, and you eat oysters. Look at those. They're disgusting looking, and you eat them. They're like snot in a shell, right? No wonder. No wonder they had some of the rules that they did. And we have weird rules as well. So there is some truth that the Bible has some weird rules, some weird stuff, but we all have some weird stuff. What is important, like I said in this, is not to get bogged down in the weird, all right? What's important is to see the principles that lie behind all of this, because all of those things that God would tell his people to do or not do or not touch had some cultural relevance for them, right? It was important to the way that they understood culture and life and their society and that kind of thing. And so we have to kind of get inside the cultural setting a little bit at times to understand the deep, beautiful, life-healing and transforming truths of this particular book. But part of that means we need to know what we're looking at. We need to know what we're looking at and how to look at it, right? So for example, I am a Star Wars nerd. That is unapologetic. Everybody knows that. And back in the day, I actually used to be more of a collector. I collect a little bit now, but I used to collect a lot. And I would go to a toy store and dig through the clearance bin and find some figure for like $3, and I could go and sell it on eBay for about $400. And I could do that because I knew what I was looking for. I knew that there would be like some decal missing or some accessory that wasn't in the package, and there's crazy collectors who will pay crazy money for mistakes, right? So I would do that because I knew what I was looking for. Anybody else could just plow through it and not even notice. And if you don't care about Star Wars collecting, you won't even see the treasures that are there. Well, in the same way with Leviticus, if we don't know what to look for, if we don't see that there's structure and form to it and a setting and a context, we'll just see it as a bunch of word jumble, right? So this morning is all about trying to lay that foundation. So we're not going to get so much into the content of Leviticus, but we're going to look at the context and the setting, the world that it was in a little bit, what God was trying to say to a group of people as he gave this piece of literature to them early on, and what the implications are from all of that. So that is our homework assignment for the day. And so I want to start kind of foundational. Some of this is going to be new to you. Some of this is going to be Greek to you. Like you're going to be like, I didn't know any of this stuff before. But hopefully we can all kind of learn a little something from today. So we're going to start it off by starting in the very first part of your Bible, the first 5 books we call the Pentateuch. All right? Fancy word, just 2 basic words slammed together that means the 5 tools. That's it. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they're 5 different tools. One's a hammer, one's a saw, one's a chisel, right? One's a ratchet. I mean, like they all do different things. They're not trying to do the exact same thing. So you have to understand that when God is working early on in this project, he's giving these tools and they kind of interlock. They build on one another. It's like the Voltron of the Bible, right? They all have these pieces that do a job. So in Genesis, for example, the very first piece of literature in the Bible, that's all about the fact that God made us for relationship. God wanted to dwell with us and shape our lives. And so that's what Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden is all about. It's God being with people and then God wanting to shape those people in such a way that they would transform the world around them. That's the goal. But then they became very egocentric. It wasn't about God and them and community. It was about the individuals and what they wanted and their desires. And so that selfishness is really the root of what we see as the sin in the first 3 chapters of the Bible, right? And everything goes off the rails. And from that, everybody becomes very self-interested, selfish, self-driven. And therefore, it contaminates not just the little nucleus, but really all the peoples of the world are kind of contaminated by this thing, right? So the nations are broken. And so in Genesis, God says, I've got a plan then to rescue the nations. I want to bring healing and wholesomeness and harmony anew. And so he shows up to this dude named Abram, who, by the way, was not a religious man in a good sense, but in a bad sense. And yet God in his grace says, I'm going to use you, bro. I'm going to use you, and we're going to heal the nations. We're going to bring healing and reform and beauty anew. We're going to see human flourishing brought forth again. And so God promises to use Abraham and his kids to do that. And that's Genesis. And you see the family grows. But then it gets to the next book, the book of Exodus. And by then, God's family has become a full-blown nation. They have just multiplied like bunnies over hundreds of years. There's a ton of them, and they're all in Egypt, and they don't have any freedom. So God says, all right, I'm going to rescue these people, and they're going to be a nation for the nations. They're going to be unique, distinct, different. I'm going to heal them so that they can go and they can heal others. That becomes the big plan. And so God rescues them, and then he gives them these commandments, the 10 commandments. He says, this is the way we're going to live in community and relationship and agreement and have this sense of oneness. But the problem is God's kids that he's rescued, they still are not healthy. They've been contaminated by a lot of stuff over hundreds of years in a foreign land, and so they don't have necessarily harmony. They don't have wholesomeness in their lives. They don't have a sense of God's presence in a powerful way. And so no sooner does God give them these rules that they start breaking them. They just do their own thing. They go off the reservation and they make other gods instead of worshiping the one true God, and God's like, I'm done. I don't know what to do with these people. I'm not going to dwell among them. And then Moses says, no, man, you got to stick with the project. You got to stick with the plan. You got to stick with your people. And so God goes, okay, well, then we're going to do this way. We're going to build this tent, and I'm going to come and dwell among the people in the tent. It's called tabernacle. And I'm going to dwell among the people. And there's going to be certain rules and requirements that exist for community, for healing, for life flourishing. And those requirements are Leviticus. So it goes right from Exodus, where God comes to dwell in his community of the Jews, and then he goes right into, now here's how we're going to relate. Here's going to be kind of the family dynamics of relationship in this whole equation. So that's what we're looking at. Now, you see these 5 books, and they just kind of, okay, they're 5 tools, however they work. But with Leviticus, it has a unique kind of function then in light of all of this, right? In fact, if we break these out for a second, what you notice when you break it out is that suddenly you go, Leviticus is at the dead center of the 5 tools. And that's on purpose. This is by design that it's at the dead center. Because here's some things about Leviticus that are really kind of interesting, at least to me. First of all, again, it is the kind of the fulcrum of the 5. That's true. The other thing that's interesting is if you were to read this little piece of literature, you would see the word holy comes up 150 times. 150 times. If you read a 20-page book and the same theme comes up 150 times, that's a mandate, right? This is God screaming at his people saying, there's something about this word you're going to want to investigate. There's something about this word that changes everything. In fact, this word is so sacred and it's so unique that the Jews didn't even call this Leviticus. They called it the book. They just called it the book. Sometimes they called it when God calls, because God calls from a tent to Moses in the very first verse of the thing. So they didn't even call it Leviticus. It was just the book, because God said, man, be holy like 150 times. Another little tidbit about this that you may not realize, of all of the books of the Bible, the one that has the most direct quotes of God, God said, Leviticus. Not Isaiah, not the Gospels, not Psalms, not Exodus. God speaks more in Leviticus personally than any other place in the Bible. And he's making a lot of big deal about this idea of holiness. And then really at the center of Leviticus, the center of the center, you have this thing called the Day of Atonement. And atonement is a weird word. It just means at one ment. It's this idea where God says, you know what? The relationship between humanity and me is broken, but I'm going to forge an at one ment. We will be one again. And so at the center of Leviticus is this ritual about at one ment. And it's a ritual that for New Testament Christians, we can fast forward and go, oh, and then Jesus does this in a fuller, bigger way as the story unfolds later down the road, right? It foreshadows something that Jesus would do. And so that comes in the future, right? This cross and Christ and loving the world and giving himself for the world, that all comes in the future. But the project begins in Leviticus. Again, God's heart is to heal. God's heart is to help. God's heart is to create harmony. God's heart is to reconnect humanity and reconnect humanity with himself. And so again, Leviticus becomes the pattern. He's building a nation of healing for the nations. It's going to be a colony of uncommonness. It's going to do things different than everybody else does, and that's the foundation that he's laying. Now, to understand this a little bit better, there's two things you're going to have to kind of process today. So this is a little bit of the homework that we have to do going into this. First is you have to understand how he lays that out inside Leviticus. Like Leviticus has more structure than you realize, and I'm going to show you how it has structure. The other thing you have to realize is that it has structure in the context of a world that it was given to at that time, right? So there were certain conditions in the region that was true. And then God speaks to this, gives this structure, and then puts that inside a particular kind of social context. So we're going to start with the structure, then we're going to get to the social context, all right? And to do the structure, I'm going to let somebody else do that for me because they're smart and they do cool videos. So you can watch a video right now that gives us a sense of, oh, here's the symmetry of this piece of literature as well as the themes that you're going to see within it. So go ahead and check this out.
The book of Leviticus, we know you've been avoiding it because it's weird. So let's fix that. Now remember, the story of the Bible began with humans in God's presence, but they were banished because of their rebellion. However, God wants to be in relationship with us, so he chooses one family that he will use to restore the world back into his presence.
And so God's presence comes to dwell in a tent right in the middle of Israel.
And that's great.
But it creates a problem because it's so intense that Moses can't go in, and other priests who enter inappropriately, they die.
Well, wait, if God's presence is good, how is it all of a sudden dangerous for people?
So think of it this way. God's presence is like the sun. It's pure power and goodness. And when something mortal and corruptible gets close to such pure power, it's destroyed. And so the word holiness is used in Leviticus to describe God's pure and powerful presence, which, like the sun, is both good and dangerous. So the point of Leviticus is to show how corrupt Israelites can live near God's goodness without being destroyed. Now, in the book, there are 3 ways for how this is all going to work out, and these are going to seem strange to you, but just hang in there with us.
The first one is rituals. The second is this idea of the priesthood, and the third is a bunch of purity laws.
Now, the book is broken up into 7 sections, and each solution is explored in 2 sections of the book. The rituals are here, the priests are here, and the purity laws go here.
Now, the first solution, rituals, involves a lot of animal sacrifices. And so Leviticus begins with detailed instructions for how to make these sacrifices. Some are ways of saying thank you to God, and others are simply ways of saying, I'm sorry.
And here at the end of the book, there are some more rituals. These are about observing sacred days and festivals. They're all celebrations that retell some part of the story of how God rescued Israel and set them apart from the nations.
The second solution to the holiness problem has to do with priests. You see, being directly in God's presence is really dangerous. So he appoints priests as special representatives who can go into his presence on behalf of others.
So in this section, we have a story about how the priests are ordained into the priesthood. And then this other section explains the set of higher standards that the priests have to live by because they work so closely to God's presence.
The third solution in the book is all about purity laws. And this is by far the hardest thing to understand. For example, in this section, we're really concerned with knowing whether you're clean or unclean.
Or another way of saying that is being pure and impure. And here's what we need to know to understand this. When you're in a pure state, you can be near God's presence. When you're in an impure state, you can't. And so it was really important for Israelites to know what state they're in at any given moment.
So the first thing we have is a list of pure and impure animals.
Yeah, this list of animals is divided up by where they live. So on the land, in the sea, in the air. And the text is just not clear about why certain animals are impure or why touching or eating them makes you impure. What is clear, however, is that avoiding these creatures will set Israel apart, and it will remind them that God's own holiness should affect every part of their lives, including what they eat.
After the food laws, we get a lot of random rules about things like skin disease, touching dead bodies, what to do with bodily fluids.
But they're not random. All of these are things that the Israelites associated with life and death, which are sacred things because God is the author of life.
Okay, but simply coming into contact with these things makes you impure?
They do, but we have to keep in mind that it's not wrong or sinful to be ritually impure. You just wait a few days, take a bath, offer sacrifice, and you're pure again. What is inappropriate is entering into God's presence when you're in an impure state.
Now, there's more purity laws over here in this section.
Yeah, these focus on Israel's moral behavior. So these are laws about social justice, healthy relationships, having sexual integrity. Living by these laws will make Israel into a morally pure people who can live near God's presence.
Those are the three solutions. Now, you've probably noticed that they surround the very center of this book, and it's here that we find a really important ritual called the Day of Atonement.
Yeah, so Israel's a big tribe now, and odds are there's a lot of sin happening that goes unnoticed, that people are not dealing with. And so one time a year, the priests would take 2 goats, and one of those goats is killed, and its blood is carried right into God's presence where it symbolically covers or atones for Israel's sin.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Well, the meaning of the sacrifice, it's explained in the next chapter, where God says that the blood of a creature is its life. And so this goat's life is offered as a substitute. It's receiving God's punishment for Israel's sin so that the people don't have to.
That leaves the second goat.
Yeah, the priest puts his hands on it, and then he confesses all the sins of Israel. It's like he's placing the sins on the goat. And then that goat gets cast out forever into the wilderness. It's called the scapegoat.
Yeah, I've heard that word before.
Yeah, it's this very powerful image of how God is graciously removing Israel's sin.
But let's be honest, sacrifices in general seem so barbaric.
We have to remember that in the ancient world, sacrifices were the main way of buying favor from the gods. But the problem was that those same gods, they're unpredictable, they're fickle, you never know if they're going to ignore you or they're going to turn on you. And so it's in this cultural setting that we see Israel's God as totally different. He does get angry about human corruption, but it is never arbitrary. And he loves people. So he provides this clear way for Israel to know with confidence that they are forgiven and that despite their corruption, they are safe to live near his presence. And so that makes the book of Leviticus actually a revolutionary statement in its day.
So you're like, oh, there's a little structure in there. There's some pieces to this whole thing. And the core of it is what? God wants to be with people who have been very self-interested for a while and don't always realize what it takes to be with him. And so he starts to lay this out. And he's like, no, we're going to heal the world, but I got to heal you first. And as I heal you, that will be a catalyst to the healing of the world. And it all comes back to the presence of God. And so that's what Leviticus seeks to do. It seeks to give some framework, what that would look like 3,500 years ago as they're just coming out of all the mess that they have been in, right? And now part of this, you have to also realize it's not just about them, right? That's what we're saying. It's about them to then let this expand to others. So God's got a vision for the world, right? I want to keep stressing that this is about God's vision for the world. So he's going to use them as an archetype of then transformation for the world. So what God does is he says, all right, I'm taking you out of Egypt. I'm taking you to a new space. It was your ancestors' land and everything else. But there is a heart behind this that is deeper than property, all right? And we're going to call that patch a desert for today Holy Land, all right? It's Holy Land. Now, we call it the Holy Land today, but can I tell you, it is far from holy in the Holy Land today. It's actually very common in the Holy Land today. Holy means uncommon. The current Holy Land is common. In other words, it's divided, it's angry, it's at war, there's friction, frustration. It does not show the context of human flourishing that God desires to show. But his original structure and plan was for Holy Land, a space that would be different. And in that difference, the world would be changed. That was the heart. Now, the trick behind this is that God decides to put the headquarters of Holy Land right in a sketchy neighborhood. And there's all kinds of neighbors, Las Vegas, San Diego, San Dimas, right? Like all these towns, man. And they're all sinful. They're all completely different. They are completely driven with an egocentric nature, right? They do atrocious things to their newborns. They sacrifice babies. They have no sense of holiness as we're going to understand it, but rather there is an unholy disposition. The problem, though, is that God's kids are easily influenced by kids from the other side of the tracks, right? And God knows this. So he's rescued them, but they break rules. He's wanting to dwell with them, but then they do the things that get in the way of him dwelling with them. And so he's like, man, I'm really going to have to dwell super potently with them. So therefore, he tells Moses, build the tent, and I will come and I will dwell with you in the context of this tent. I will dwell among my people in the center of Holy Land, right? In this special structure. And from that, God's presence will radiate out. His influence will radiate out among the people and create kind of like a sphere, like a bubble, if you will, kind of like a biodome with polyshore and everything, right? So all of that will be in this space, this region that is Holy Land. But don't just get sucked into its property and borders. We're talking about a social disposition. We're talking about that God wants to create a new kind of ethos to the way they live in their world, how they process things. It's kind of a prototype world of love and mercy and justness and equity that the world had never seen before. That's what he desires to do. Now, the trick again, like I said, though, is God's people are a mess. And so in some ways, this reminds me more of like a Walking Dead compound. Like outside, there's zombies, but inside, it's all kinds of dysfunction. And so God has to root out the dysfunction. And the way he roots it out was what you just saw with Leviticus. There is this structure, these zones, if you will, that kind of get highlighted with rituals and priests and purity rules for the community. That's what's really going on. It's a zone concept there. So to help you get this, I'm going to give you a different illustration. I want you to think about a campsite. So we have a bunch of discs up here, right? Think about a campsite. Like you go out into the woods, you're driving around, you're looking for the perfect spot. You finally see that clearing in the trees, and that's going to be your space, right? That is going to be Holy Land for you, right? Now, outside of the borders of that space, it's trees and ferns and blackberries and bears and cougars and you don't know what. So outside of the border, it's unknown and it might be risky. Inside the zone, it's going to be flourishing and safe. And so you start to put together your camp zone. So you park your car. That's always the first thing you do. After that, closer to the center, you put the tent. Closer even to that, you put your chairs and your food. But what's at the absolute center of every campsite? Your fire, right? And the fire is light, and the fire is life. Fire cooks your food. The fire brings security. The fire gives you a sense of where the borders are. The light doesn't pierce past the trees outside of the border zone. And that's exactly what God is constructing with Leviticus. It's just like a campsite. It lays out just like a campsite. So going back into Leviticus, we see that at the center of the structure is not only the tabernacle, but this Ark of the Covenant, this Raiders of the Lost Ark item, right? With these wings are over it, and there's fire over the top of it, just like a campfire. And from that space is God's presence that will kind of radiate and infuse and kind of displace darkness with light. That's how it works. Now, beyond that, the next rung is the rituals, the next zone. And the rituals are all about worship. Because here's the thing, if you're going to enjoy God, there needs to be worship, and there needs to be right worship. And so Leviticus says, hey, there's right forms and there's wrong forms. Wrong forms are going to rob you, right forms are going to bless you. And so that's the next zone. After that zone, there is the zone of the priests. And their job is really kind of to make sure the worship is intact, that there is a sense of protection over those things. It's the enclosure zone. And there again, God says, and you know what? There are impure ways to live as a priest, and there are pure ways to live as a priest. And if you do it impurely, it's bad and it's not thriving. If you do it right, it's life-giving and enriching. And so he lays those things out. And then the last part of kind of the spheres of things would be the way the community interacts with one another. How it is generous and kind versus selfish and self-interested and everything else. And so God gives a bunch of rules, all pertaining to social dynamic and interrelatedness and everything else. And he says there's impure ways you can do it and there's pure ways that you can do it. All of that is in the equation of Leviticus. But this isn't just so they can be good, right? So they can be moral or upright. No, this is so they can thrive, that life can flourish, that God can change the world through them. That's why it's there. And this same kind of structure is still true for us today. Like I said, Leviticus is an archetype of how we can understand our own spiritual journeys and lives. So if we take this into a New Testament context, into a Christian context, at the center is who? Jesus, right? And Jesus for the Christian is the center of life. Now, sometimes we don't always do that and we put him off to the side. And can I tell you, that's when life kind of goes bad, right? But when Jesus is at the center of your life, as Paul says, Christ who is your life. When he's at the center, then things are going to come from that center that are going to shape your life, your family, your context to be better and to be flourishing, right? So Jesus at the center matters. But the next rung really matters too, which is worship of Jesus, right? It's amazing how much Christians, we don't make worship as much as a priority as we used to. We miss church sometimes. We don't get connected with groups. We don't always go out of our way to make sure that we guard that non-downloadable thing called worship. And when we worship, it fills us, but when we don't worship, it drains us. No wonder it's the second layer. We must engage with Jesus at the center in worship. So that's important to us. And so that's, again, about kind of a God-word holiness. Jesus is at the center, is holy, and this is a God-word holiness that we are to exercise. From there, the New Testament says that every one of us are now priests, which means every one of us has to have an inner holiness in our lives. That there are things that corrupt us and there's things that enrich us. There's decisions we can make that harm us internally, harm our emotions, our perspectives, our psyche, or things that can fill us and resolve us and strengthen us and heal us, right? So that's going to be the inner holiness layer in this whole thing. And then last, you have the outer layer of holiness, which is our outward focus, right? It's how we conduct ourselves in the world that we live in, how we handle our spouse and our kids and our parents and coworkers and fellow students, and how we engage our society, how we leverage social media, whatever it is. It's how we display ourselves as being a people different in God, a people being holy. See, that's how Leviticus still matters. And that whole structure matters because it's cyclical, right? It begins to feed and fuel and focus us. So the more it's like I'm focusing on Jesus at the center, I'm worshiping him in a regular way, I'm really working through having inner purity, and I play that out in my public life. The more you do that, the more it drives you back to the center, and it feeds through your life more, and it drives you back to the center again, and it feeds through your life more. And it's like a flywheel. It picks up more speed and momentum over the course of time. Leviticus knows this. Jesus knows this. Now we know this, that this is the structure that enriches. And at the center of all of this is that word, holy. Holy. Holy is what heals. Now, I'm sure some of us sitting there go, oh, holy, yeah, I know holy. So here's your pop quiz. How would you define holy? or holiness? How would you explain it to somebody else if they said, I don't know what that word means? What does that mean? Because nowadays we just say things like holy crap and holy cow and holy moly. And like we don't even, it's a weird word we don't even use except when we're like angry at something or surprised by something, right? So how would you like recognize it if you saw it? How would you know it was missing if you didn't? That's like this weird question maybe. But as I thought about it more, I'm like, you know what? I do think we sometimes struggle to know what exactly that word means. Like we think we know it, but we may not fully know it. I think sometimes we look at it and go, oh, well, it just means morals. Holier than thou means, you're just a square. Well, I'm going to venture to say, you know what, that's a subcategory inside there someplace, but that's not what holy is. Let me read to you kind of a start off to this in Leviticus chapter 20. It's an anchor verse in Leviticus. It says, you must be holy because I, the Lord, am holy. I have set you apart from all other people so that you might be my very own. Now, like I said earlier, right, God said, I'm going to have a nation to reach the nations. We're going to bless the nations. We're going to heal the nations. We're going to enrich the nations and everything else. And so God says, I've set you apart in this way to be holy. Why? Because I'm holy. So the first thing you see there is that whatever this word means, it emanates from who God is. So whatever he is what we are to execute. The other thing I see here that I think is important is that you could at least say this, whatever holy is, it's different than everybody else. It's other than. That's why holy just means uncommon. It means sacred. It means set apart, right? It could be used in any context. In their day, it could be even used in very negative things, but it was uncommon or set apart. Here, though, there is an attitude. It's a distinctive that we're to embody. All of God's people are always to embody. And if you were to look through the 5 tools, right, the Pentateuch, 5 tools, you were to look through all the Old Testament, you would see that there was something very particular, and it wasn't simply being ethical or being moral. They had something much more foundational in mind when they spoke of holiness. In fact, our friend Paul, who was an Old Testament scholar turned New Testament apostle, he ported the idea of holiness into the New Testament. He's like, man, we're going to talk about this some more because it's really valuable, and we need to understand what holiness is for our lives. And this is what he says in 1 Thessalonians. He says, may the Lord make you increase and abound in love for one another and for all, as we do for you, so that he may establish your hearts blameless in holiness before our God and Father. So you read that, and of course, because the topic right now is holiness, you tag into holiness, and you go, great. How are we to be blameless in holiness? Are we supposed to be moral? We're supposed to be good? We're supposed to be upright? Is that what makes us blameless in holiness? All right, I'm gonna help us on this verse. Let's bring it a little yellow in there. He says, here's what I want God to do. He goes, I want you to abound in love toward insiders and outsiders so that you can display what holiness is. See, what holiness is to the Bible is not just being good people. What holiness is to the Bible is being uncommon in such a way that you love indiscriminately. That you love the insider and you love the outsider. You love the lovely and you love the unlovely. You love your enemy as much as you love your friend that you love. That is holiness throughout the Bible. How we overlook this sometimes always surprises me. I think we just so zero in on what I'm supposed to do in my moral framework to be holy, and we miss that holiness is something expressed. It's something that must be true in my life so that I can more effectively love others. In fact, here is a definition of holiness for us this morning. Holiness is the opposite of the commonness of our egocentric nature. It is the opposite of our commonness, because if unholy, or if holy is uncommon, well then sometimes we look around and go, man, what's common is not always love. What's common is more self-interest and selfishness and all those kinds of descriptors. See, holiness is an uncommon, other-centric love displayed in mercy and justness through every sphere of life. This is why Leviticus gets into all these strange little details about life, right? Like what you eat and what you wear and how you conduct financial transactions. It gets into all this aggregate, and we're kind of like, why does it get into all those details? And because God's like, because I want you to be uncommon in all of those things. Be uncommon with your money. Be uncommon with the way that you handle your supply. Be uncommon in the way you treat other people. Be uncommon. That's how we're going to change the world. That's how we bring flourishing anew, by being uncommon. So God says, be different. In fact, in Leviticus 20, verses 7 and 8, he says this. He says, set yourselves apart to be holy, for I am the Lord your God. Keep all my decrees by putting them into practice, for I am the Lord who makes you holy. So he says, be different in love. These are commands, right? And he says, and be different in all the little things I've called you to do. If you took all the commands of Leviticus and boiled them down into subheadings, they would have 4 categories: moral, social, financial, and spiritual. And in all those areas, what God is saying is you need to love. You need to love in all those contexts. And by obeying what I call you to do, it makes love most possible. So, for example, why should I have sexual purity in my life? Because if I'm sexually pure, you know what? That's the most loving thing I can do. It's most loving for my wife, or if I was single, it'd be the most loving thing for somebody else's future spouse, or for my future spouse, to be truly loving by saying, I'm going to choose sexual purity because that's a loving thing. But when it's about me and my gratification and my pleasures, that's not a loving thing. So God gives all the stuff about those topics to say, this is the expression of love. It's thoughtfulness toward others, not trying to take from others. Or God talks about how you conduct your business affairs and your money. And it's like, hey, man, don't have somebody do work for you and then you don't pay them what you agreed to pay them, because that's not loving. You agreed, that's what you do, right? Like he has these things, and it all comes back to love. So it's not simply about the morality or the ethics. Those are extensions of love. All the rules display that we care for other people. And at the core of this was what is indigenous to Leviticus. It's the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment in all the Bible is found in Leviticus. The New Testament writers kept quoting it as, this was the greatest commandment. And they all borrow it straight from this bizarre little piece of literature. What is the greatest commandment? He says, do not seek revenge or to bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And you go, well, great, that's insiders. That's people inside the bubble, right? He says, and don't take advantage of foreigners who live among you in your land. Treat them like native-born Israelites and love them as you love yourself. I'm telling you, man, for that time and that world, that was revolutionary. That blew everybody's gourd, man, because it's like, wait, let me get this straight. We're going to be uncommon by loving those who want to war with us. We're going to be uncommon by trying to be a catalyst for change in our own lives. And from that, hopefully that's a catalyst for change for other people's lives. Now, I guarantee you it was all messy in there because humanness is messy. But that was the spirit of what they were supposed to be. They were supposed to be revolutionary by being holy, by being uncommon and unique through love. See, I can't help but look at this and just think about something that's popular to us nowadays, which is we all want to make the world a better place. We just want to make it a better place. And what I would say in that is that's awesome, and we should want to, because that's exactly what God wants to do. He wants to make the world a better place. This is why he gives us his word. This is why he gives us Leviticus. He's trying to make the world a better place. He wants to create a template for a colony that is different. And we as Christians and as churches and as the church should be a colony that is different. We should look different, sound different, love different, invest different, be forgiving in a way that's so different, to go the extra mile in such difference. That should be what we are. In fact, Hebrews chapter 12 says this. It says, work at living in peace with everyone, and work at living a holy life, for those who are not holy will not see the Lord. And I think our minds can go to a lot of places on that, but a couple of things that stick out to me. First of all, work at living at peace and work at living a holy life. They're kind of the same. Like, you want to truly be holy. It's not you taking a stand for all kinds of things. It's how you love people in the stands that you take. It's how you show mercy and justness in the context of that. Not just saying, here's what's right and here's what's wrong, but if they don't know you love them in that, you've missed holiness. The other part of this, I think it's so important, is if you want to see God in your life, then you need to press into holiness. This isn't about whether somebody's saved or not saved or whatever else. This is just simply saying, you know what, you want to see God work in your world, in your family, in your life, in your own psyche, whatever else. You want to see God bring real change. You want to make the world a better place. Then you need the presence of God. You need the presence of Christ. You need the worship of Christ. You need the inner purity motivated by Christ to live out an outer purity for the sake of Christ to the culture around you. You go back to those circles about our own life, and that's what it requires, and that's what it takes. It takes that investment where the heart and life of God is laid in our soul at the center, and from that our lives radiate out what his life is all about. Let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, I thank you so much for the reminder of holiness, for the fact that it's an important value. It's easy as modern Christians to be more focused on transparency and authenticity and openness, and all of those things are highly valuable. We need to be honest with our broken humanness. But those things don't heal us. Your holiness heals us. Our honesty helps us, but your holiness heals us. And I pray that we would be people that are healed, and from that we would be healers to the people around us. That we would be gracious and loving and merciful and gentle. Even where we disagree, that people would know, man, I undeniably love you no matter what. That is the thing that you can walk away with. May that be what makes your people different and makes your people holy. In your name, amen.
I invite you to stand up.